Welcome to our Change Readiness Index open house. I am excited to dive into this content with you, and so let's get right to it. I am Nancy Murphy, the CEO and founder of CSR Communications, and over the past 30 years, I've served on, chaired, and worked with hundreds of nonprofit boards. And it's that experience that really led me to this work and to create the Change Readiness Index. And our other speaker today is Jen Bell Elwanger, who had a last-minute conflict. She was gracious enough to join us earlier this morning for a recorded interview. So we're going to share a little bit of that with you later as well. At CSR Communications, we've worked with many of the nation's top philanthropies, nonprofit organizations, everyone from the Annie E. Casey Foundation to Fair Trade USA and Temple University. As many of you probably know, we've been seeing a lot of things lately like change is coming, change is coming. Guess what? It isn't coming anymore. It is here now. And we don't want your organization and the people you serve to get caught off guard or left behind. So that is a big part of why we created the Change Readiness Index and why we're so excited to share it with you today. So these are just a few headlines that we've, a few news clips that we've kind of ripped from the headlines to give you a sense of what some of the change is that we're all dealing with right now. Whether it's burnout and staffing shortages that continue to challenge nonprofit organizations, or the unexpected, even unimagined impacts of artificial intelligence, not just on nonprofit organizations themselves, but what is the impact of that on your cause, on the communities or people you serve? I don't know that we've had many conversations about the implications there yet. If you're interested in learning more about all the disruptions that might be headed your way in the next 18 months as a nonprofit organization, we published an article on this maybe a month ago now, 6 weeks ago. So Erin, our communication manager, is going to post that link in the chat where you can find that on our website. So the question is, will your board effectively lead change, proactive, good, necessary change, and lead through whatever change might be coming at you effectively? Or will this change cause unnecessary disruption, potentially unnecessarily negatively affecting your organization and those you serve? So with that, I want to tell you a little bit more about what the Change Readiness Index is. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen for a moment and we can just have a little bit more conversation here. So at its most basic, the Change Readiness Index is a tool. It is 35, 38. I think we added a few questions in this last upgrade. 38 question survey that board members and the chief executive or executive director each complete. It takes about 5 minutes. And those prompts or questions rate the organization on 8 scales of change readiness, 8 characteristics of change readiness boards. And organizations complete that online survey. You get a baseline report, which shows you on a nice, beautiful dashboard where you are on each of those 8 scales, your top 3 strengths within each of those, your top 3 areas of improvement within each of those, and some actionable recommendations. At CSR Communications, we don't believe in theory or insight for insight's sake. We want you to be able to immediately apply and do something with the insight you're getting. So each report includes actionable insights. We created this tool because, as I mentioned, over the last 30 years, I and many of our team members have worked with many nonprofit boards, served on nonprofit boards, chaired nonprofit boards, and we've experienced ourselves the ways in which certain characteristics of these boards make the organization more able to manage or lead change smoothly or not. When have things kind of gone off the rails? Oh gosh, it's because we didn't have that trust and transparency amongst board members. And when a crisis came that we needed to react to or respond to quickly, we didn't have those connections that enabled us to make decisions quickly. I also created this because nothing else like it exists right now. Trust me, I've looked for these tools. I mean, sure, there are things like the board source, board evaluation that measures, your overall board effectiveness, but that's designed for kind of to serve everyone. And in many cases, it serves no organization really well. It's very lengthy and it's very costly in a lot of ways to complete. And so it doesn't really measure change readiness. It measures all sorts of other things which are helpful, but it doesn't really measure the kinds of things that this index measures. And leading with intent, board sources, great research that they complete every 2 to 3 years. But that's not organization specific. So you might get some generic recommendations there, but you're not getting things that are unique to your organization. We also looked at what are the complaints that we hear the most from board members, from executive directors or CEOs, and what kinds of maybe uncommunicated expectations or requests of board members are underneath those, and how can we use this change readiness index to kind of measure some things that will bring those conversations to the surface. So that's a little bit more about what the change readiness index is and why we created it. So let's move forward. Here you can see a quote from Jen. We're going to have a little clip from our interview with her, so I won't dwell on this. But again, she sort of reinforces here how it sparked some critical conversations. So what are some of the benefits of assessing your board's readiness for change right now? The first is retention of high quality board members. So often we hear of organizations that are experiencing unhealthy or just maybe more turnover than they were planning for. And maybe some of your best board members are leaving. And so measuring your board's change readiness demonstrates a serious commitment to the organization's future. It can help board members up their commitment as well by knowing that the organization as a whole takes change readiness and takes future and the planning for that future seriously. When change happens and it's maybe a little rough, a little disruptive, the change readiness index, understanding what your board's change readiness is and taking action to boost it can actually make that change experience less painful, less disruptive, less contentious for board members. So oftentimes we see boards that aren't change ready and the organization experiences change. Then a lot of people end up leaving because the experience of trying to navigate that is so painful, contentious, and disruptive. So you're retaining your high quality board members. That's awesome. Maybe you also want to recruit more high quality board members. So as organizations evolve and grow, the board needs to evolve and grow. As terms expire and you need to bring new people on, you want to make sure that the organization is positioned to attract those really high quality board members, and measuring the organization's readiness for change can really signal to prospective members that the board takes its responsibilities seriously and that it provides professional development and growth opportunities for board members. They're going to learn a lot about effective boards, effective leadership, and about themselves as part of this process. We've also learned that this is a great tool for if your board has a board development committee and you're, sometimes they're struggling for, how do we actually develop our board this year? What tools do we have? What resources can we bring in? We've heard that some board development committees are really using the Change Readiness Index to set their board development agenda for the year. Stronger board executive relationships. So think about an organization that is maybe considering a big expansion strategy. And the board is saying, oh, we're not sure we're ready for this yet. That feels too risky. Or maybe some members on the board are saying that, but the CEO is like, no, we've got a plan. We're pretty clear. And it can feel very frustrating because you might be talking past each other and you don't understand where the disconnect is. Well, one of the things that the Change Readiness Index does is it can illuminate where perhaps the CEO or executive director and the board have different perspectives on similar issues. One of the things that we measure in the index is foresight. So the board's understanding of risk, and is there a common perspective on risk for the organization, not just what each individual's risk perspective might be. Have you had that conversation organization-wide about what your risk tolerance is? And that will really strengthen the kind of relationships and conversations that boards and executive directors or CEOs have. It's a different quality of conversation that is sparked by the output from the index. And so, of course, that leads to a better understanding of risks and opportunities. Are you doing scenario planning? Are you preparing for when the opportunity presents itself, we're going to be ready to jump right in and take advantage of it. So a better understanding of risk, how to prepare, illuminating blind spots, those are all things that come from measuring change readiness. And then finally, better decision-making. So you can see with all of that input and all of those conversations happening and different issues being put on the table in a healthy, productive way. And also one of the things the index measures is healthy conflict. So when the organization is able and the board is able to manage itself in those ways, the board is also better equipped to make high quality decisions in partnership with the executive team. Boards now have all the insight they need, and they have that foresight. They're really grounded in their strengths, and they can make decisions from a place of confidence. And I love this quote from Cindy Eggleton, the CEO of Brilliant Cities. She said the insight on the index is more than just about change readiness. It really tells her whether her board is healthy in general or not. And I think this illuminates another time when your organization might need the Change Readiness Index. Brilliant Cities used to be Brilliant Detroit. They're getting ready to, they were getting ready to do this big national expansion. And Cindy wanted to know, is my board ready for this? Well, not only did her board do very well on the index, they scored green on every single one of the prompts, not just the 8 characters, on every single one of those 38 elements. And so that gave her organization the confidence to be able to move forward with this big leap. And it illuminated some things that were working really well with their board, that as they build a new national board, they want to make sure they're replicating. As they build new local boards in the cities where they expand, they want to make sure they're bringing some of those practices and principles with them. So what are some of the common mistakes that boards make that really hinder or minimize their readiness for change? The first one is they rely on implicit assumptions and beliefs. So this is where lots of things are unspoken. Lots of things are implicit, and we need to make them explicit. What are all the assumptions and beliefs about risk that folks are bringing to the table? What are all the assumptions and beliefs about potential changes underway? About the leadership of the organization, about the board chair? Like, who knows? There might be all sorts of things there. Well, when you measure your Change Readiness Index, it can help spark those conversations. And one of the things that we encourage boards to do to be change ready is to get all of those assumptions and beliefs on the table and have some conversation about them, so that you know where the direction is aligned and where there might be some serious divergence on future of the organization. Boards also make the mistake of abdicating rather than delegating. So think about an organization that decides to launch a new DEI initiative, for example. And the board says, great, that seems like kind of a staff thing. So yeah, you just go off and do it. They completely abdicate any responsibility, any strategic direction setting, any why. They're very disconnected from the staff, and the staff starts to perceive that the board is out of touch or unaware of the consequences or implications of some of these change initiatives. And so it creates an even wider gap and can lead to all sorts of disruptions and problems that could easily be avoided if the board was very clear on where the management governance line was at that moment for that organization. And if they delegated the appropriate specific responsibilities and retained some strategic direction setting, some accountability measures, if they had the means to collect anonymous information about the impact of change, etc. And the final common mistake boards make is masking discomfort and fear as quote unquote protecting the organization. So your board is definitely not change ready if you hear in the boardroom lots of references to our fiduciary responsibility, where there's a very low tolerance for risk. We love the status quo. We really want to protect and preserve the way things are 100%. And that may be based on some discomfort and fear about the future and the likelihood of success or failure of something. But instead, it's talked about as if it's the right thing to do because it's our fiduciary responsibility to protect this organization. So I want to share some very, very, very hot off the presses results from a case study where a foundation used the Change Readiness Index as part of its nonprofit capacity building investments. So for those of you, I know we have a few foundation representatives joining us today, so maybe this will spark some thinking for you. So the Rowe Price Foundation has a robust capacity building program that they offer mostly in Maryland. And we did a pilot program with them this summer using this upgraded version of the Change Readiness Index, where 6 organizations out of several tens of organizations that attended an open training session on this topic, they applied to participate in a 6-month cohort that was focused on the governance role in leading change. Those organizations completed a baseline survey, and barely 3.5 months later in this cohort, completed their follow-up index survey. And the cohort was made up of both board members, in some cases the board chair, and other cases the executive committee and the executive director or CEO. They had 2 in-person sessions. Well, the second one is tomorrow. And those were half-day sessions where we really did some deep dive to kind of anchor the beginning and end of the program. There were 8 video lessons that they received and a bunch of tools and articles to read on key topics of change readiness throughout the 6 months. We came together for 3 group virtual sessions, and then each organization got 3 individual coaching sessions. And the first one, we went into a deep dive of their baseline change readiness index. And we talked about their actionable recommendations and how they wanted to prioritize those. So the early results, we haven't done the wrap up, we haven't collected all of our data on the impact of this pilot, but just from the follow-up surveys on the Change Readiness Index, which again, these are extremely hot off the presses. So we're still, crunching some of the numbers, but each organization improved in at least 3 of 8 measures. There was, I think, 2 organizations that improved on all 8. Accountability, which is things like the board members, follow through on what they say they're going to do. That's one example of what we measure on accountability. And that showed the biggest improvement for every organization. And the thing that matters most to me on these results is, so great, we've measured, we sort of see on paper what your readiness is, but how does that apply during an actual, potential disruption? And 2 organizations experienced unplanned but smooth board leadership transitions during this cohort. So that to me is why this whole tool exists, because there was an unexpected shift that could have been really disruptive, but both organizations were able to navigate it smoothly, have great leadership come into place. And I just got a note this morning from one of the other cohort members where they're super excited about their final results on the Change Readiness Index. And they mentioned that, part of why they wanted to participate in this is that they have a planned leadership transition from their founder to, now some new distributed leadership, different board leadership, and that they feel very confident about being prepared for that transition. They might even accelerate it a little bit now, and that they know it's going to go as smoothly as possible. And you can see here just, where some of those jumps were, again, very, very early results. So I want you to get a chance to hear from Jen. She is the board chair of one of these cohort organizations and also the CEO of a nonprofit herself. Well, I am so excited to have Jen Bell-Ellwinger here with us today to talk a little bit more about her experience with the Change Readiness Index. And Jen is both the board chair of Maryland Reads and the CEO of the Data Quality Campaign. So Jen, I would love to just hear first, share a little bit about each of those roles and what your experience has been with the Change Readiness Index.
Oh, thank you so much, Nancy, for having me, letting me join you this morning. I've become quite the fan of the Change Readiness Index. Thank you for introducing it to us. And I serve in 2 capacities as I think about using the index. One is as the chair of the board, Maryland Reads, and we're a fairly new organization in Maryland, and we're focused on ensuring that all children are able to read, just as simple as that. And then in my other hat as president and CEO of the Data Quality Campaign, we are a national advocacy organization, and we focus on the use and access of educational data to improve outcomes for all learners from early learning through workforce.
So you just mentioned 2 very different organizations, right? A relatively new state focused and then a almost 20-year-old
about to celebrate our 20th anniversary, yes.
Yeah, so congratulations on that. So how is the Change Readiness Index relevant in each of those pretty different scenarios?
So we were introduced to the Change Readiness Index through work that we were doing with CSR Communications and Rowe Price Foundation introduce us to be involved with nonprofit organizations to think about how do you work with your board and how do you make that work meaningful and how do you become a learning and continuous improvement board. And the work that we've done with CSR Communications around the Change Readiness Index, which I was a little skeptical when you said all of the board needs to take this index, and you said it's only going to be a quick little survey. And to be honest, it was only a 5-minute survey, but we got so much good information as a new board, as a new organization, and it has helped us really focus in on some areas that we knew we needed to work on, but it was validating to get both the feedback of places where we were doing well and also those places where we needed to improve upon.
And so then, you called me up and said, hey, is this available to other organizations too? I'd like to use it in my CEO role. So what sparked your interest in this for the data quality campaign? How do you see it being useful to you there?
Yeah, I first was struck by the ease of use of the survey, that we could get some pretty good depth in a very quick, short time frame. And that I thought was the first thing that was appealing, because board members are really busy. This is for the most part volunteer time, volunteer hours, volunteer organization, and you want to make sure that that things are not too burdensome. So that was really important. And then the feedback that came out of it from my seat as a chair of the board with the executive director of Maryland Reads, and the conversations that we were able to begin both one-on-one together as board chair and executive director, and then how we brought in the rest of the board to think about areas like risk management and succession planning were areas that we really needed to focus in on. So as I thought about that, and my organization at the Data Quality Campaign really saw that this was an opportunity for us. I have a new board chair, and I have some new turnover in the officers of the organization. So this is a great time for us to do some board development, which is a place that we really haven't had an opportunity to do over the past. I've been CEO for 7 years. We really haven't had an opportunity to take that time and reflect on us as a board as a whole and the areas where we need to work on and areas that we know are doing well. Like, we just haven't had that opportunity to have those discussions in that time. So I felt like this was the time to make the time to do this board development work.
Well, and I loved when I spoke with your board development committee, I think they were very excited because they said, this gives us kind of the agenda for our board development work this year. Like, this gives the committee a focus. And so I really love that.
Yeah. And I do think, oh, sorry, Nancy, I do think part of, when you are, the difference between Maryland Reach, which is a new board, is that everything is new and we're learning all of it. When you come in and you have a pretty strong board that's been in existence for a long time, like you mentioned, we're about to celebrate our 20th anniversary. And we are the practices of our board at the Data Quality Campaign are pretty well documented and cemented. You want to be thinking about how can you move it to that next level? What are areas, are we just comfortable, or are there things, around risk and other areas that we maybe haven't focused on the way we need to?
Great. So kind of building on that, why would you recommend this tool as something other nonprofit board members or executive directors, CEOs should consider?
So I think, but I think this whole idea of being a continuous improvement organization, and that providing professional development for your board is well, two things that are really important. As board members, like we mentioned, they volunteer their time and their treasure. And that doesn't necessarily mean that they know how to be a board member also. And so this helps to bring along the board in giving them professional development, because it's really important that board members also get out what they give. And this is a way for them to build on their skills also as board members. So that's one part of it. I do also think it becomes an accountability document for us as a board to say, okay, here are the 2 or 3 things that we're going to work on over the course of 6 or 18 months. Maybe it's about, we've been talking about a retreat for the past 5 years. Now is the time we're going to do it, because it sounds like from the feedback that we've received that it's time that we really do want to engage outside of the boardroom. And in fact, that was one of the findings out of Marilyn Reed's that we found, was that the board really did want to come together in person, and we had just not had that time. And so from that, it inspired us to make the time for that board retreat. And we had an overnight retreat in late September. And I am about to enter a board meeting right now where we did an overnight. We do a board dinner on the night before, and then we spend all day in our board meeting. But that engagement so important. So I'm looking forward to the results of the index when we do it later this winter.
So Jen says it better than I ever could. So you get to hear from her, her experience, both as a board chair and as a CEO. So what comes next after one completes the survey? And Jen referred to a little bit of this. So when we work with organizations in any board of directors evolution project, we always start with the Change Readiness Index, and then we can move into a Change Readiness Accelerator, which is basically a day-long strategy session with the CEO, president, executive director, and usually a couple of board members. And we really dive into the recommendations and prioritizing and coming up with the strategy, the plan, the timeline for addressing those actionable recommendations. If organizations have some big change underway or that they're planning, and or if they want to do some bigger board development, board evolution work together, then we often move into what we call our context capture phase. And that is where we have deeper conversations with board members, interviews. We go beyond what we capture in the Change Readiness Index surveys. We might also survey staff or conduct executive team interviews. So we want to get a deeper understanding of the organizational context overall. We oftentimes include an artifacts excavation. So those of you who've worked with us before are probably familiar with this concept, where anytime you move forward with change, there are little things you leave behind that tell you who and what matters, who and what you value, and how things really get done in the organization. And sometimes they conflict with the change that you're leading or the change that you want. So we have a whole process where we come in, work with either the board if we're explicitly focused on them, or we look at the organization overall if there's a broader transformation effort underway, and we identify, unearth, and replace any of those artifacts that are in conflict. We might have a board retreat, a board offsite, a board and executive team offsite that we design and facilitate, or some work sessions around a particular topic. And then finally, board chair and or CEO executive coaching. Sometimes we do board chair CEO paired coaching. Sometimes we do individual coaching separately. So now is a great time. If I think we have some questions in the chat, so we'll take a few minutes to answer any of those before we wrap up. So I'm going to stop sharing for a moment. Erin, do we have any questions in the chat?
Yes, we do. The first one I think Jen kind of answered for us, but maybe you can expound a little bit on how long the actual survey takes.
Yeah, so the survey itself takes board members and the CEO about 5 minutes. I think it's actually 4 to 5 minutes. So the time commitment is pretty brief. We usually keep the survey open, and we're flexible on this depending on what's going to work best for each organization. But we usually keep the survey open for at least 2 weekends, so that board members who have day jobs, have the space to be able to complete it, even though it is only 4 to 5 minutes. So from kind of start to finish for an initial kickoff to getting your baseline report is usually about 3 to 4 weeks.
Okay, that was the next question that I had was how long after you complete the survey, what do you get the report back? So 3 to 4 weeks.
No, let me clarify that. So from like, hey, we want to do this project, let's get everything in place and introduce it to our board and kick it off and whatever, to the baseline is about 3 to 4 weeks. It's usually about a week from the survey closing to getting actually, if we're doing it as a single organization, not, a bigger cohort at a time, it can be even, 3 business days. So pretty short turnaround.
And the last one I have in here is there any additional support offered after we get our results back?
Yeah, so part of our standard Change Readiness Index package is a briefing with your board on your baseline findings. So we will, share the report. I usually join the board meeting. Most of these are virtual meetings that I join, and I'll sort of walk through, answer any questions, and then the board will decide how it wants to move forward. If a board is interested or an organization is interested, we can provide additional support on any of those things that I just walked through, whether it's, hey, we really want this readiness accelerator lab because we see the change coming at us, or we've got an expansion plan in place, or we know we have a CEO transition coming. And so they want to accelerate the improvement on the progress on their readiness. So we might want to do that accelerator lab. Other organizations say, you know what, we're getting ready to launch this thing, and we could really use some help on that. So that might be more of a customized project. It might be facilitating a board retreat, doing that executive coaching, etc. Any other questions? Nope. Okay, great. Well, those were good ones to get us started. So I'm going to jump back into sharing my screen and kind of round us out so that we end on time. So in addition to our board of directors evolution suite of services, we offer a variety of change management capacity building, everything from training, leadership development, executive team and manager, people leader, executive coaching. We do strategic planning. We develop change communication strategies, key stakeholder messaging, and kind of consensus building, getting that all important buy-in for your big change initiative. We design and facilitate executive offsites and retreats. And of course, the board of directors evolution that I already mentioned. This is our fabulous and growing team. I hate to even put this number up here, these nearly 300 years of combined experience, but thankfully that's not just me. We've got all these amazing folks with 10, 20, 30 plus years of experience. We are a certified women-owned business and a certified woman-owned small business by the SBA. So some of the benefits of working with a small business, maybe you have supplier diversity targets, we can help you meet those. We definitely give you that red velvet rope service from our first conversation to the final deliverable. We are very flexible and agile. We don't have a ton of red tape in working with us. We do have some quality processes and checklists and things that we've put in place to ensure a smooth and frictionless client experience. So we hope you will see those benefits of working with our small business. And so we come back to the question, will your board effectively lead change and lead through change, or will it cause unnecessary disruption? Change is already here, folks. There is no time like the present. Whether you're approaching this from a little bit of fear about the uncertainty or excitement about the opportunity, you will not be able to get your desired result on either one of those things if you don't have the readiness for change at your governance level. So if you are curious to learn more, you can schedule a call. I think Erin's putting the link in the chat below the slides. So we'll also include that link in the follow-up email that we'll send out with the session replay. So, if you're just curious to learn a little bit more, no obligation, no huge commitment here. Let's talk. And I'm happy to share some other experiences that our clients have had with this, how it's helped them, when organizations knew they were ready for this. Although I think right now, like I said, every organization needs it. So let's have a conversation and see where it goes. And finally, I would love to invite all of you to request an invitation to our Next Big Thing Executive Forum. I know some folks that are here with us today are regular participants in those. This is a monthly-ish, I will call it, a series that brings together small groups of C-suite executives, senior leaders. These are informal, off-the-record, peer-to-peer conversations on all the topics that are essential for defining, designing, and successfully realizing your next big initiative, your next big change, next big transformation. We have covered topics previously, such as, I think this time last year, we had the hidden costs of annual performance reviews. We're seeing those hidden costs pop up right now again, and the 4 biggest risks of trying to change them. So that was one great topic we had last year. We also had a topic, this might have been a year and a half ago now, on sudden windfall shock. So we had some panelists that joined us, some executives shared their personal experience receiving significant windfall of ARPA funds, federal government funds at the end of the pandemic, and Mackenzie Scott grant, and talking about the disruption that caused or could have caused if their board was not ready and didn't have some things in place to facilitate that. And trying to think of what other topics might be of interest to this group. Oh, we kicked off the year with using AI to make us more human. And February, we covered the trends among trends. We looked at kind of the meta trends driving change this year. So if you'd like to join us on December 3rd, please visit that URL and request an invitation. We haven't totally landed on our topic yet for the last forum of the year. I'm still playing around with a couple different options, but stay tuned. I think, Erin, maybe you also could put, if that's not that same link, if people want to see the other topics and read a little bit more about some of those other conversations, if there's a different link for that, let's include that as well so folks can just get a little more information. So that is our open house for today. I hope you learned a little bit more about the value of measuring your organization's, your board's readiness for change. And I look forward to speaking with many of you in the next coming weeks and months. Have a great day.